Okay, we're going to talk a bit about senses. Old Dilberts. I'm wearing a synthetic pheromone scent that makes me irresistible. It should kick in any minute. Uh-oh. Waiter, here's $300. If I start to flirt with him, kill him. Well, so far so good. The waiter apparently likes him. I've got to mace myself. And the second one, the pheromone cologne is making women desire me physically, but they can't reconcile it mentally. It isn't fair. I'll have to wash the cologne off right after my aerobics class. Remember when people had aerobics classes? No, you probably don't. We talked about sense receptors in the basic loop. And keep in mind that the receptors are very much associated with usefulness and accessibility. Is that if you don't need to see something, then you probably don't have receptors to see that. Is that grass eaters don't really need to differentiate colors if they're just eating the ground cover, whereas bees need to differentiate flowers to set them off from the green background, and a lot of seed-spreading animals need to differentiate ripe fruits, which is how the plants signal that the seeds are ready to go, again, from the green background. But that's also why sometimes things that don't look very camouflaged is that in their typical environment, an orange tiger blends into the background pretty well if the prey animals don't see orange as different from green. Probably the oldest of the receptors are chemoreceptors. We differentiate between chemoreceptors for things that we make contact with, that would be taste, and chemoreceptors for things that we pick up from a distance, that would be smell. Is it obviously things released from a distance, you don't have the preponderance of molecules to analyze. So it's got to be a lot more sensitive. And pheromones, the thing in the cartoons, are communication molecules released into the environment that are picked up by other animals. Usually pheromones are associated with sex. When they do other things, they call them alarmones, which are, what you would expect. Although in ants, an alarmone has two effects. If you get very little of it, it's basically a message going, there's a problem, follow the smell down its concentration gradient. And so alarmones are an attraction, but when the concentration builds up to a certain amount, which basically means you are here where the problem is, then the response to the pheromones is find something that's not an ant from our colony and go after it. So come here and then kill. Mechanoreceptors, touch, pressure, very often associated with pain, although pain is very often a chemoreceptor. Our pain receptors pick up chemicals that are inside our cells, that if our receptors are picking it up, it means cells are breaking, damage is happening. And your basic pain response is a message saying, something's happening that we need to stop. We need to either get away from this or we need to change what we're doing. Something's hurting us, and this is our signal to you, brain, to figure out what it is and stop doing it. But sometimes the pain is just an overwhelming mechanical response. We're going to talk about hearing separately, but for a lot of animals that live in the water, hearing is a mechanoreceptor, is that you're picking up, water conducts sound vibrations much more powerfully than air does. So you can kind of get away with a sensitized touch sensation being your sense of hearing. It's not entirely clear how to classify temperature receptors. Temperature receptors don't actually detect temperature, they detect heat flow. And in animals that have to set and keep a particular internal temperature, then loss or gain of heat is a really big thing that we need to keep track of. But whether it's a mechanoreceptor, it's not a chemical receptor, it's not real clear. I mean, heat is a physical property, so it's sort of a mechanical property. And then there's proprioception. Proprioception, you have receptors placed all over a system in a skeletal setup. It may not be in the skeletal system, but it's for animals that have a heavily articulated skeleton. And basically, it allows me to take this pen and pass it to my hand behind my back because my brain knows where my hands are even though I cannot see them. It knows where my feet are when I'm walking. So proprioception is an absolutely essential type of mechanoreception that we use in order to be able to do stuff. We know where our parts are. Vision, an ability to pick up electromagnetic radiation. Contrast. Simple vision picks up shadows, dark things, and movement. Is that we do have detectors, and they're very common, that are big enough that movement of a contrasting edge in different directions is picked up and sent to the processors, so that you know something's passing this way in front of you, that way in front of you, or that way in front of you, or that way in front of you. In some animals, as I mentioned before, certain color ranges are useful. Our ancestors were fruit eaters, so we've got pretty good color vision. A lot of birds have really good color vision. A lot of insects have really good color vision because there's a lot of plant-animal interactions where signals pass between are based on color changes against the green background. Polarization is that as light travels through mediums, it takes on certain, it angles the waves in certain ways that polarizes them. Now we can't see that. We use it in glare-reducing glass. It takes polarization and kind of won't let it through. But some animals absolutely, if you can see polarization, you can see things in the environment around you that are useful to see. Like a bee knows where the sun is on a cloudy day because the light coming through the atmosphere, even through the clouds, is polarized a particular way. And since bees orient to the sun in order to get themselves back out and back to their hives, then being able to see polarization is very useful. We don't see that, but a lot of things do. You can set up a single lens, and then the light comes and it hits a screen of light detectors. That's a single lens system. You can set up a multi-lens system where you have a whole bunch of little lenses, and not too far away, because they're little lenses, you have your receptors. Why? Well, how much room do you have? Is that the bigger the lens, the farther away the screen needs to be. If you see animals with really big eyes, is that they're gathering lots and lots of light. Deep sea squid, things like that, have these huge eyes. And you need the screen. This is what happens in people. Your lenses keep growing, they keep thickening as you get older. And you hit a point where every time you change the focus of your single lens, in order to have a focus on the screen, you need to move the screen. We actually have muscles that squeeze our eyeballs and move the screen back and forth. Well, you hit a certain age, and your lens has gotten a little bit too thick, and when you start to look at stuff up close, your screen goes back and it hits the orbit of your eye, hits the bone. It can't go back any further. So you can no longer focus on stuff up close unless you change the focal point with glasses or you change the curvature of the cornea. or you put contact lenses over the cornea. But you know, I've only worn reading glasses for maybe 12 years now. Before I had some of the best vision you've ever seen. I'd be able to read an eye chart, a 20-foot eye chart from 50 feet away pretty easily, or even 100 feet away. And could see up close really well. And then I can't move the screen properly anymore. This throws the image where the screen can go to. But you need a lot of room. If you look at jumping spiders, jumping spiders have like 4 big single lenses on the front of their face. If you look at the side profile of their heads are very deep because that single lens needs some room for its single screen. Is that a whole bunch of little lenses you can put on the outside of a head and not take up a lot of room inside the head. For small arthropods, that can be very, very useful. You can actually put a whole bunch of those lenses on the end of a stalk and be able to point lenses in every direction. So it gives you more room, you don't need as much room in the head for it, and it's much easier to have multi-directional sight with a whole bunch of lenses pointing in multi-directions. So there's definitely an issue, single lens advantage. Now, the problem with the downside of multi-lenses is that each lens has its semi-independent cluster of receptors. I'm not going into it, but take my word for it. It said they're semi-independent. That reduces the resolution of the whole system, is that you can't get, let me put it the other way. You have a screen full of cells packed all in together of receptors in a single lens system. Like pixels in a screen, you can pack a lot of those pretty closely together and get pretty good resolution. Where if your screen was divided into segments and the rim of each segment you couldn't put pixels in, it would reduce the resolution of the entire screen. So multi-lens systems have somewhat lower resolution. They get around that by having, where you do need resolution, at tiny, tiny little lenses packed in really closely together. If you look at a dragonfly's eyes, they actually snatch little bugs out of the air in front of them. As you can see where they're going to see their prey, they have a lot of little bitty lenses. They've got pretty good resolution on that. Binocular vision. Being able to see from 2 different angles, sometimes more, an item. And what the processing system does is that you're going to be asked this in the lab. Well, in fact, you already were asked this in the lab, and nobody figured this out, even though it's literally right in front of you. You hold your finger up, you look at it through one eye, and then you change eyes. What changes? Where that finger is against the background changes. Your brain takes that shift of foreground against background and reads it as distance. Because up close, there's a big jump against the background. Far away, there's a little jump against the background. And that's how binocular vision, purely using the 2 images, can read distance up to a certain point. Eventually, the shift is so small that you have to use other things like, knowledge of size and other sorts of things. But binocular vision for things that grab prey, that are really important. For our ancestors, jumping from branch to branch and knowing where to grab that next branch was really, really useful. So even our plant-eating ancestors need a pretty good binocular vision. You will sometimes see people talk about animals with their eyes on the sides of their heads as not having binocular vision. But it turns out, depending on the animal, birds especially, they do have detectors facing this way, and they do have pretty decent binocular vision, or they wouldn't be able to land on a branch. Even though, we tend to think that other eyes are oriented the same way ours are, where if they look in that way, that must be where most of their information is coming from. They're not getting information peripherally that's useful. Well, it turns out they don't always work that way. One thing I do want to mention, in fact, I just saw it in the octopus video that I saw yesterday, although they came up with a different input. It was long. Octopus and other cephalopods, we talked about this, they blend into backgrounds really, really well. They have chromatophores and a whole bunch of other phores that can change their color, and they can adjust the surface of their skin to match backgrounds. But for a long time, it was like, well, yeah, but they can't see color. It's like, what do you mean they can't see color? Well, they don't have pigment cells. They don't have color receptors in their eyes, so therefore they can't see colors, which is typical vertebrate, chauvinism. They do see color. They just don't see color the same way we do. Is that they have prismatic lenses that split off different colors of light to different receptors, so that there's a pocket of receptors that if they get hit, they're seeing red. And they get hit, they're seeing yellow. Also, it turns out there's color receptors in the skin itself, so that they can sense their immediate background colors and match the chromatophores to that. I didn't know that before I saw the video, and I haven't had a chance to double check that, but it sounds reasonable. Mantis shrimp. The vision systems in mantis shrimp are incredibly complex. They have a whole bunch of receptors. We haven't figured out what they do yet. And a mantis shrimp, which comes up to things and whacks them with their claws so quickly that they actually can cause spontaneous gas bubbles to come out of the water, what they call cavitation. And if you piss them off through the edge of an aquarium, they can break the aquarium and break your thumb if you grab one when it doesn't want to be grabbed. But they have two eyes on stalks. And so they have binocular vision, but each eye has three kind of pupils, pockets of very, very tight lenses. So they have trinocular vision on each side of their head. So they can very quickly hit things in their general vicinity without even, when a frog wants to pick something up, it has to turn its head and face its eyes at what it's looking at in order to get its binocular vision working in order to pick stuff up. Is that mantis shrimp don't need that. Okay. Movement. You need to be able to have a sense of balance. So you need to know where you're moving and how to adjust if you're turning really quickly, right? If you're following people going onto an interstate and they're going around a curve in the car, you'll notice they're leaning in. Doesn't help them. It does if you're on a motorcycle. It does if you're running. Is that feedback says lean in so that the centripetal force doesn't topple you over. But we do have that. We also know to one extent or another which way down is. If you're flying, you really need that. If you're swimming, it's very useful. Our static equilibrium, our sense of static balance, basically our sense of gravity is not all that sensitive. I mentioned hearing. Hearing is in fish and aquatic animals, maybe a slightly sensitized mechanoreceptor picking up vibrations in the water. When you get into the air, they're not up to the task. So in order to pick up air vibrations, several specialized structures that basically amount to eardrums have developed in a whole bunch of different groups of land animals. And of course, their range of what they can pick up varies. Is that bats that pick up vibrations well beyond our hearing range, what they call ultrasounds. And elephants pick up vibrations traveling through the ground from, kind of shaking the bottom of their feet on it. Those are infrasounds. And what's an ultra and an infra? It's outside of our range. We set a hearing range based on what we can see or what we can hear. Well, what we can see too, because infrared and ultraviolet are beyond the visible light ranges. In terms of other senses, a lot of animals can sense magnetism. In ocean water, in salt water, living things tend to generate a pretty decent magnetic field, and there's a lot of animals that can sense that. Is that stingrays are gliding over the sand, and their sensors can pick up where prey is. Sharks have that. They get in really close to a prey animal, and they roll their eyes back into their sockets to protect them. But they're going to zero in from up close on the magnetic field around the animal, which is why they bite metal things too, because metal in salt water also produces an electromagnetic field. a lot of animals can sense the magnetic field of the earth, and it helps them to navigate. It's like having a little compass in your head all the time. I'm looking at, yeah, is it, then of course, then the psychic, can you pick up like these psychic vibrations? Well, when somebody figures out what the energy input, what the input is that's being sensed in a way that can actually be measured, then, probably not. Is that most of the stuff that animals are picking up is just things that are in their normals, the normal types of senses we just went through, but they're just way more sensitive than we are. Okay, that's it for this particular chapter. So we got one more chapter to go on behavior.